It was noontime today in the center of Beijing when a man walked to the middle of the Avenue of Eternal Peace.
All right, welcome back to the Survival and Basic Badass Podcast, Kevin and Chuck. Today, we're going to talk about Teddy Roosevelt. You know, you guys keep asking for more badass episodes, and who's more badass than Teddy Roosevelt? This guy's fighting mountain lions, bears, whatever, fighting wars single-handedly, climbing mountains. Kevin, who is Teddy Roosevelt? No, he's not the crazy one. He's the one who's a badass. What do you got?
Well, FDR thought he was a badass too, and he actually got his illness from swimming in a lake. But whatever, that's how he ended up going crippled. But we're getting sidetracked. Teddy Roosevelt, he was a lot of stuff, man. He had a full life. He was a author, police commissioner, soldier, cattle rancher, naturalist, explorer, statesman, mountain climber, New York State Assemblyman, Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. He was the governor of New York. He was vice president and president of the United States. So he had a kind of a full life.
And had time to be a badass at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty freaking impressive. Now, this guy starts badass way back. Now, he did come from a wealthy family, right? That's my understanding.
Yeah, real wealthy, not like rich people, but
not just the nice house at the end of the block.
No.
He wasn't even on our block.
Yeah, he was so wealthy. His family was so wealthy that his dad's full-time job was philanthropist. Just giving money away. Like that was his full-time job, was building schools and that sort of stuff.
Right.
So I think that when you talk about people that are uncorruptible, a lot of the times I see rich people that are like the most corrupt people. They've gotten wealthy by being corrupt.
I know people have made that accusation recently, but go on.
I mean, historically, a lot of people that are really rich get their money from doing shady shit. The old-fashioned American way, the way Teddy Roosevelt did it is by inheriting it. That's the best way to get rich. Yeah.
Right. And so he was you kind of right, go ahead.
So when he was a little kid, he was like asthmatic. He was real small and he was a smart kid, but his dad told him like he's got the brains but not the brawn. So you got to start working out every day. So
he got to work. Asthma. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You got to work through it, man. Now, he says that he cured his own asthma through like sheer force of will. He just willed himself to not have asthma. I mean, most asthma, when you have it as a kid, it kind of clears up as you become an adult.
But I like the sheer will story. That sounds
Roosevelt's version is better, isn't it?
That's it. Well, you knew he was smart because he had glasses, and anybody who has glasses, smart guy, right? So his dad had a partner, and it may have been his brother. You thought they had a law firm together, but anyway, he created the Natural History Museum. I believe the official name is the American Museum of Natural History.
Right, now, and you've been there.
I've been there. You've been there. If you have kids and you live in New York State, you got to make sure you make that trip. Pretty much, if you go to New York City, you got to go to the Natural History Museum. It's kind of like an icon, a legendary thing. So
right. It really, I think it's it's like how much you feel like paying. When you go in, it's not. They don't charge you a big fee. It's just whatever you give them.
Yeah, if anything, I know I'm too cheap. If it was more than $40 a person, I wasn't doing it. So whatever it was. But I think, like you said, I think it's a donation thing. I don't even think it was a thing. So this guy, well, this is how we get back to Teddy, is age 12. This kid's donating specimens to the museum. And he ends up like donating over 3,500 specimens over his life.
Hmm.
And it's pretty much like you can't go around New York State without walking into a bar that's got some giant moose head or something that
Yeah. I
Roosevelt
was
shot.
just telling Chuck last weekend. That's where I was at. I was at some bar in Albany with a giant moose head on the wall. Was Teddy's moose.
Nice. So his family does a trip in 1872. So he's 14 years old, and he ends up collecting 20 birds that he shoots or whatever. And they
Hmm.
stuffed again. When you got money, you can get things taxidermied and set up and shipped back.
Right.
Because we all go on. You remember your first Egypt trip, right? And
Right. Yeah. My
actually,
first
I have
Egypt. My
been there
first
if we
trip
want
to.
to get down to it, but it turned out it wasn't a family vacation. It
Yeah,
was more like
I was in
training.
Egypt briefly, and it was
Yeah,
like must have been. Now I know they say that a lot of Egyptian cities are kind of shitty and scary. This was the worst. This is probably the worst city in all of Egypt, and I only got an afternoon there. So
yeah, that sounds right. But you know how it is. But yeah, so he was born 1858,
mhm.
and yeah, he's fifth cousins with FDR.
Right, right. Now
FDR
they
was
vaguely knew each other. They knew each other, and they had
right.
met, but they weren't. They weren't like buddies. Buddies. There are two Roosevelt families. They'd split off. One moved to Hyde Park, and one side of the family stayed in New York City. Now their family had been here since the 1600s. They were Dutch, um, and they just happened to own most of New York City before it was New York City.
Yeah, that's a good way
So
to be. You hold on to that
that's how
land,
you get
right?
rich. You know.
You got to hold on to that land. I always feel like it's too late, but it turns out the world just keeps growing.
Hmm.
People keep that sprawl keeps coming. You just got to buy those corner lots. That's the key. Corner
That's the trick.
lots.
That's the anchor
Um,
point.
that's the anchor, right? And you just right now I'm a little outside of town, but I'm waiting for that sprawl.
Hmm.
Um, all right. So this guy, you know, goes out, gets all these animals. Like I said, he did an Amazon trip. He collects 3,000 animals. So he's all over, filling this museum and it's pretty impressive. It's funny. I was just saying that when you go, they'll have like lions and you're like, "Oh, I've seen lions before, or I've seen moose before." But when you go into the Natural History Museum and you see the ones that he shot and that he's got, these things are like 3 times how big you imagine a lion to be,
Yeah.
and 3 times the size of any moose I've ever seen. You're like, "Oh, damn. That's significant."
Yeah. I think it's interesting because w- people gave him a little bit of a hard time about going to Africa to shooting all
Right.
these animals that and he said, "Well, listen, everybody's shooting all these animals. They're going to be gone soon. If I don't
Right.
shoot some of them myself,
He's
nobody
the
will
victim.
even know what they ever looked like."
I actually tried to dig into that. I'm like, how does he wrap his mind around being a conservationalist kind of thing and preserving everything and then going and killing everybody? But he talked about if you share how impressive and amazing these things are, it just inspires people to preserve land and create a sanctuary and even, save the animals, right?
Right.
Because when you see how majestic and awesome they are, when it's not just abstract, it really does become something. He actually had, they called it the square deal, where he created a lot of the national parks. I think it was something insane, like 340 million acres.
Yeah, he actually while he was president, uh went off with some dude and hiked through uh Yellowstone.
Mm.
And like I can't imagine a president at this point just being like, "All right, guys, I'm gonna go out for into the woods for a few days," you know.
Well,
But
yeah,
think times were different, I guess.
that's it. So he, like, in his honeymoon at 22 years old, he climbs the Matterhorn. It's in the Alps,
Hmm.
and yeah, no, that's like, ice cliffs, the whole thing. And they're all like, we think we got to go back. And he's like, nope, nope, we're doing it. And that's kind of a badass. I don't know. I read like he's been all over. Like he was like the farmhand in Montana. And he talked about one of the stories I read was somebody had stolen his horse, and he tracks the horse down, and the guy, or tracks the guy down, I guess, who stole his horse. And he goes into the bar, and the guy's like sitting at the bar, and because the horse is out front, he goes in and he's like, what the hell? And the guy's got his guns, and he's like, yeah, what is it, Four Eyes? And it's like, you need to buy us all drinks, that's what you need to do. And he fires his two pistols into the air, the horse thief.
Mhm.
And Roosevelt walks up and he's like, oh, I'm sorry, buddy. And as he goes over and he's kind of laughing, and he just freaking punches the guy in the face and freaking drags him out of the bar, takes his guns from him, and pretty much, sets the standard. That's the kind of guy this is. I
Mhm.
guess think like Rip on Yellowstone. That's
Yeah,
pretty much Teddy Roosevelt.
yeah. Now he was a police commissioner. This is
Mhm.
before he actually went out
Yeah.
ranching. It was 1895. He was a police commissioner,
All right.
and his big thing was it'd be kind of racist today, honestly, but they were having problems with the police officers going into the Jewish neighborhoods and getting
Mhm.
into fights because the police officers didn't understand Jewish law and tradition. And the Jews weren't about to have some foreigner come into their part of the city and start telling them what to do. So he got all the Jewish police officers together and set them up on patrolling those neighborhoods. And he did a lot of that sort of stuff where he would have um, officers of certain nationalities going to the parts of the city where those nationalities were like the predominant
Prevalent.
people
Yeah.
that lived there. Yeah.
That's the
So
thing. Yeah, you can understand the culture. Turns out you might be able to avoid some crazy
right.
disputes.
Hmm.
That's
Yeah.
like they
Now the
go ahead.
problem though that they had in New York City politics at the time, it was really like organized crime. You know what I mean? They were stealing more than they were really helping anybody out. And
Right.
like Tammany Hall, that was all going on then. So when he started getting involved in politics, people were like, "Oh, Teddy, like it's not a good look, man. It's a bad look to be involved in politics in New York."
Yeah.
But he was um then they realized they had a problem though because he was anti-corruption and started like rooting this out. As a police commissioner, was one of the things was like throwing out corrupt cops and stuff. And
Yeah.
everyone's like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to do that. That's not how it works.
Right.
And
They said
has
he would, patrol the streets at night and like catch guys sleeping. And
hmm
cops. And
yeah,
turns out cops are still sleeping on the job today. I've seen it. Um,
yeah,
but
it happens.
They they'd be sleeping or whatever, taking bribes, all this stuff. He shut it down. He's like, "No, we're not doing this anymore." And also like the whole selective enforcement thing was going on. And he
Hmm.
shut it all down. And people didn't like that.
Yeah, and he fired the one of the chiefs of police because same sort of stuff, taking bribes, and
Yeah.
it didn't go over well with the other politicians. Um, and then he ended up becoming the uh, assemblyman, New York State assemblyman, up
Mhm.
in Albany, and it was the same shit. Rooting out corruption, and they're like, no, 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 you're supposed to root out corruption in the guys in the other party, but
Right. Right.
he wasn't discriminatory like that. You know what I mean? He went after both, and so it gave everybody a bad vibe. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
so what they wanted to do is get rid of him. And so he started campaigning for William McKinley. And McKinley became president and gave him a job as the assistant secretary of the Navy.
Which is a pretty sweet deal.
Yeah, not a bad deal. Teddy was a big fan of the Navy. He had written, massive volumes of books on the history of the United States Navy, history of War of 1812, you know, a whole lot of stuff about the US Navy. And so he knew a lot about it. And Teddy Roosevelt and George Washington are the only ones that I can think that started a war before they were a president.
Yeah.
Teddy Roosevelt kind of started a war. So he there was issues going on with Spain in Cuba.
Right.
The Cubans didn't want Spain to be there. They wanted them out. The Monroe Doctrine stated that European powers weren't welcome in the Americas. So got to do something about it.
Right.
So he sent the Maine down there, the USS Maine down there to, kind of see what was going on.
Right.
And at some point, the Maine exploded and sank for disputed
Right.
reasons.
That's another show.
Right. And you would think like, all right, well, you're in a good position as the Secretary of the Navy, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, since the Secretary of the Navy's gone, like wherever the hell he is, he wasn't
Right.
around. And so you're in a good position to like, have an impact on this war, but he did like the dumb thing and resigned from the Secretary of
Yep.
the Navy. But before he did that, he dispatched a fleet of ships to the Philippines to attack Spain there. Then he resigned and started his own
The
little
Rough
army,
Riders.
like his own personal
Yeah.
army, right?
And that's it. So the Rough Riders, he's 39 years old, 1898. It's kind of a badass. And basically it's like a hodgepodge of some like Harvard graduates kind of thing, like intellectuals and
Right.
like Native Americans and just like,
Olympic
yeah, dude, he
athletes,
all over
cowboys.
cowboys. Like
Yep.
I feel like it's like just people he met along the way. I mean, I don't know
Uh-huh.
how he put these guys together, but basically he created a war so he could fight in a war is kind of how it felt like. You know, he seized
Right.
an opportunity. He didn't back away. That's how I would say. I don't mean to paint it like he was just looking for whatever. I'm saying he seized the opportunity, and it was pretty
Mhm.
badass. Think Audie Murphy. Think of the guy who charges in, and says, "Hey, I'm going to be
Mhm.
what lead from the front instead of the lead from behind." They talk about that in the military that you want to be the guy who can do, and that's why your guys respect you. Teddy was somebody the guys respected because he's somebody who jumped in and did not give a shit and moved forward with things.
Mhm. Yeah, so after the war, he came back. He was like a big war hero and stuff. And they're like, "Shit, we still got to get rid of
Right.
him. Like this, he's only gotten worse." So they found like this perfect dead end job that they can set him up in as
Oh, I
vice
thought you were
president.
going to say the governor of New
And
York would be a dead end job, but
no, he
okay.
became. I'm sorry, he became the governor of New York, and then they were like, "Nah, we got to
All
get
right.
rid of this dude." So they set him up as vice president for under McKinley, who the guy who he had campaigned
Right.
for. Um, so he was vice president for like 8 months or
Okay.
something, and then McKinley was shot, and he became president.
Right.
And he said, it's the worst way to become a
It
president,
is. You're
but
not elected. It's kind of
and he really did like
right.
McKinley. He was a fan of McKinley. So you know, he was really upset about him being shot. And now he was president though. So he started, take the bull by the horns type thing and got into it. He spent his beginning of his presidency, he sent out the Great White Fleet, which was the United States like new, ironclad
Right.
navy, steamships and steam powered ships and everything like that. And he had, kind of designed this fleet while he was the assistant secretary of the Navy, and now he got to like show it off, send it all over the world. Everybody could see like, their
Right.
impressive ships. And they say it's a show of American strength. Like I don't know what the point of that is. I think he was just one of his lines was speak softly and carry a big stick. If everybody knows that you can kick their ass, nobody starts a
Right.
problem.
That's like a West African proverb that he ended up, like he's known for the guy who, that's his quote, but yeah, he actually that had kind of, been around and he adopted it, we'll say. But hey, that's the way to be president, That's the way I see it. But it's funny
Mhm.
cuz the Navy is like the symbol of I think the US Navy creates fear around the world that it kind of gives people the idea that we can come get you anywhere. Like you think of armies
Yeah.
and stuff and it's impressive and scary and maybe it's my bias being in the Navy. But it's kind of like yeah, you really have that feeling that hey, you can kind of come get me anywhere in the world and cuz we can get
Mhm.
pretty close and then we got the planes and the guys to back it up once we get there.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I was in boot camp, one of the drill instructors said that. It's if you want to start shit, don't worry, we'll come to
Mhm.
your house. We'll come to you. But I always so Teddy Roosevelt did a lot of stuff while he was president. He served almost two full
Yeah.
terms. Uh he broke up a lot of corruption, a lot of the big trusts that were being built. Um, he believed in a 6-day work week instead of a 7-day work week. He thought by law should be required that everybody gets a day off a week.
He wanted
Um,
minimum wage, he didn't get it done. Um,
no, there's a lot of stuff he didn't actually get done. You know, he
right.
he, he was president, but he wasn't. He had to deal with Congress, and most of the Senate
Right.
disagreed with
It's
all of his
funny because
ideas.
well, because he's a Republican too, so a lot of this is very contrary to the Republican Party. Um, it
Right,
basically was kind of pro-worker instead of pro-business, which, has been the
right,
theme, and that's the thing, like, honestly, a lot of the ideas that he had are more progressive. He's known as a progressive guy. Um They're
right.
more progressive than I am personally, but I also there's certain people where you know that it's kinda coming from a good place. Like, it doesn't make things
Hmm.
right or wrong, but you just know that they mean what they say and they're actually, thinking about and trying to solve these problems, and that's pretty awesome and pretty respectable. So, I gotta say, he kind of was a badass guy, and again, he took ideas and standing up to your party is kind of badass. I mean, if you want to get down
Right.
to it. Um, yeah, I mean, all through. I mean, the guy fought, mountain lions. He one of the stories back in his younger days, somebody stole his boat, and this guy spends 2 days. He actually stopped, built a new boat to go catch the guy. It took him 2 days to build the boat in the middle of winter
Hmm.
sneaks up the river and is camping out every night. I think you said something he was reading Tolstoy. Is that to stay
Yeah,
awake
yeah.
and
Now,
stalk this guy?
yeah, I've read Tolstoy before, and that is not how you stay awake.
No.
At least not how I stay awake. But yeah, he catches up with the guys and takes them overland to actual court where they can be
uh,
tried. You know, um, but he stayed awake for 3 days with these guys so that he could keep an eye on
he
them all
goes
the
and
time.
turns them in.
Even
Right.
when they were
Yeah.
sleeping. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a badass. I mean, he definitely story
So
after story, and we still got a few more good ones that coming up.
yeah, so he goes as president. He builds the Panama Canal. I mean, he didn't physically
No,
get in there with a shovel
it
and
would have been
build it himself,
badass if he did
but
though.
he wanted a canal, and at that time, it was that piece of land was owned by Colombia,
Mhm.
and Colombia said, "No, we're not into it." So he armed this rebel group, and they founded the country of Panama, and they actually were really into a
They were
canal.
into it.
So That's where
That
Panama
sounds
came
like a
from,
Reagan
the
move if you
country.
wanna get down to it.
Mhm.
That's a
It kinda does.
that's some classy shit. So he's like the original Reagan on that one. Another thing, this guy badass. So he's kind of a warrior his whole life, right? I mean, these just so many stories we kind of skip some of them, but this guy set up so he could be sparring in the White House while he's president. Because he's like, he had a lot
Mhm.
of quotes about you got to stay, fit and active and healthy, and it keeps your mind strong. And he would bring in professional boxers and military men to come in and spar with him while he's freaking president. That's pretty badass. It's not like
Mhm.
building a bowling alley in the White House. When you set up
Right.
your own
Right,
boxing
and it's
ring,
not like
that's yeah.
it's not like sparring where, like people today spar, they don't
Yeah.
play rough. You know what I mean? Because there's no reason to get a concussion, when you're
Right.
training. But he always played rough. And he actually had his retina detached by being punched in the face so hard during one of these boxing matches that he lost his vision in his right eye.
Yeah.
So he had to give up boxing. And he's like, I gotta. He said, I can't get beat up. I have to recognize that I'm getting older now, so I'm gonna take up jujitsu.
Obviously.
So now, how this came about was that Japan and Russia were at war at the time, and Teddy Roosevelt brokered the peace deal between the two of them to end the war, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize for that. But while he was dealing with the Japanese, he liked in their martial arts. So he had a professional trainer in jujitsu come from Japan to stay in the White House and train him in jujitsu.
That's better than some of the other people they have stay in the White House. So I like
Mhm.
that. That's like I said, it's better than a bowling alley. You're
Yeah.
kicking ass here.
Now, one of the things that they said about Roosevelt when he was president was that he was always horsing around with his kids, like crawling around under the tables and stuff like that. And the press had mentioned, how kind of bizarre that was. I said, well, you have to. One of his friends said, well, you have to understand that down inside, who Teddy Roosevelt is a 5-year-old. It's just that's just how he acts.
It's
He
funny that yeah, go ahead.
his one of his sons had caught a snake in the yard of the White House, and snuck in when Roosevelt was in a meeting with an ambassador, and dropped the snake in the ambassador's lap. And he jumped up screaming, and Teddy just thought that was like the funniest thing in the world. The funniest shit he'd ever seen. He loved you know, his kids being like assholes, and he like fully encouraged it.
There you go. Well, so that's the thing. Like I saw these pictures of Roosevelt, and it's funny because the one that made me like this guy's awesome is there's one where he's just got this big grin and he's just
Mhm.
like the happy guy. And it's like, yeah, that's awesome, man. That's how life should be.
Right.
Enjoy it. Why be a stuck up jackass?
Mhm.
Embrace life. And that's I don't know. I feel like he set the standard. He really kind of brought cool to the White House. Is one of these, guys who really nailed it. Now he was followed by Taft,
Right.
and
Right. Now, so he didn't run for president for a third term. This was, I mean, before it was against the
yeah, it
laws in the
wasn't against law. That was
Constitution.
actually
Yeah. After
FDR that
FDR. Yeah,
yeah,
that caused the problem.
right.
But so he basically didn't, he said he wasn't going to run again. He didn't run again. Instead, he just he went out to Africa.
Yeah,
He's like, gotta do some hunting, gotta get some hunting in. Went out elephant hunting, lion hunting, hunting all the big game in Africa. Had a taxidermied ship back. Kept stock in that Museum of Natural History,
right.
and people loved the stuff though. So he was writing dispatches that were being sent back and published in papers. Like just his weekly hunting journal. You know,
Yeah,
and people in the United States, the rich people didn't like Teddy Roosevelt. He was
no,
a real populist president, though. Like everybody loved him. It's just people that were in positions of power were not fans. So every time he, when he was running for president, every time he pissed off, a wealthy person, he lost their vote, but he gained like 5 more votes of just
Right.
regular people, and that's how
And
he
then,
was able to win
yeah,
re-election.
yeah. And then so Taft kind of went a different way though, and
Right.
was like
He was
back to
not the same.
traditional, yeah,
Mhm.
Republican values, right?
Right.
And he was like, "Oh, I thought we were going to do this minimum wage thing, and women's suffrage thing, and a lot of things going on." And it was kind of going the other way. So he's like, "You know what? I think I got to get back into it." And that's where you get the whole Bull Moose Party.
Mhm.
And it basically they kinda said, like, it's the progressive party, it was
Right. The
just gonna be the
progressive
new.
Republican values, yeah,
Yeah,
the Lincoln Republican Party.
there you go. And
And yeah, so he was set to give a speech,
yes,
and some asshole came up and shot him in the chest. And
thought he'd slow down the guy. So he had a speech tucked in his pocket. This is one of those stories that you kinda hear, I don't know. And
mhm.
they said between the 50 pages in his speech and
That,
the,
yeah, it was folded over,
and his
you know.
glasses case in there, it well, they say it slowed down the bullet, but mind you, he stays and gives the speech is like, "You know what? I'm just gonna keep going. I did get shot," like he mentions it
Mhm.
in the speech. Like,
Yeah.
"They did just
Well,
shoot
he
me."
said after he was shot, he coughed into his hand, and since he didn't see blood, he knew that the bullet hadn't punctured his lungs, so he's gonna be fine. He's
He'll be
fine.
fine. Right. So, but the thing is, you're like, "Oh, well, it probably caught it in the thing, like wearing a bulletproof vest." I see how somebody could go on. But as he's giving the speech, he's bleeding through the shirt and
Mhm.
it's like dripping out. Like it wasn't nothing, you
No,
know?
they said it went 4 inches into his chest and broke it,
That's
hit his
significant.
ribs. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
that's
was
not.
so deep in there that they couldn't even get the bullet back out. They said it would be riskier to pull it out. He spent the rest of his life with a bullet in him.
Yeah, that's kind of significant. Yeah, no, he only makes it to 60. So it's,
Mhm.
you know,
But he
eh,
gave a 80-minute speech after being shot. So that's pretty impressive.
before going. Yeah. No, that's who gives an 80-minute speech? How do you hold attention for 80 minutes?
Exactly, exactly. He seems to be, well, like one of those people that was a bit long-winded. Like long speeches were his deal, man.
His
He
go-to?
could he
Yeah,
could talk.
nice. Now, he does not win re-election.
Now he splits the Republican vote, and it ends up, is it Coolidge that wins? The
Woodrow Wilson.
Democrat, whoever.
It's Wilson.
Wilson, that's it. Yep.
And Wilson is not. Like, we ended up getting kind of the extreme Democrat because you had
Mhm.
the Republicans splitting the 2. They
Right.
kinda had to go with somebody who is way the other way to be
Mhm.
different, and Wilson ended up doing a lot of things that people kinda will say that he expanded government power by a lot.
Mhm. By a
We'll
lot.
say that,
Yeah.
and, yeah, Wilson, I'm not a big fan, turns out, but, hey, that's again another time. So
Yeah.
then
So yeah,
yeah.
so what's he do? Now he's out of politics. He's got a big family. He's rebuilt his fortune. He's lost his fortune. He's rebuilt it, and he's lost it and rebuilt it. He was a cattle rancher for a long time and ended up, some disease spread and killed off all his cattle. And he wrote a bunch of books and made money that way.
Hmm.
Um, actually has a whole bunch of books about like birds and about hunting and all sorts of different things. It wasn't just history that he wrote books on. His first book was actually Summer Birds of the Adirondacks, and he wrote that when he was in college. um,
Nice. But
he
that's
was
the
really
thing.
into birds.
Well, he was, and I mean that's it. Most of the animals he submitted to the museum were birds. But
Hmm.
it's and honestly, birds are a little tougher to get than big animals, big game
Right.
animals, turns out. I mean, I know big game animals come after you and try and kill you. There's
Yeah.
that. But birds are a tough shot. That's a something to do. I guess if you do shotguns, I don't know. But
Hmm.
who knows? But, yeah, no, he was a badass, and So then he decides, hey, how about we head down to the Amazon? Who's going down there?
Right.
And
Well, he was the thing with him was that he was very interested in South America, and he actually had gone to Argentina a couple of times where he was paid to go down there and
Mhm.
give, speeches and talks about, different types of wildlife, and he got a real interest in the types of wildlife that were in South America, and he said that it was kind of like the last great frontier. Um, which there's a lot of places that, and in 1920 there are 1910 there is a
there
lot
are a
of
lot of
places that
frontiers
were,
left.
yeah, that
Yeah.
were still frontiers. But yeah, so he got really interested in South America, and a guy had come up to him who's planning an expedition, and he needed financing.
Mhm.
And Teddy's like, you know what, I'll do you one better, I'll finance you and I'll go along. And so they went down there. They were gonna investigate some of the explore some of the tributaries to the Amazon. Now, if you've ever looked at a map with the Amazon, there's it's one long river that gets smaller and smaller as it splits off into
Uh,
rivers where it all comes
and I have to
together.
point out he's 55 years old at this point.
Right, right. So he goes down there, and now they had a lot of issues initially. And he had a problem with this guy that wanted to do the exploration and ended up just being like, nah, dude, you're going home. I'm not into to this anymore, and sent him on his way. And they started coming into contact with these tribes that they
Hostile.
had been
Yeah.
contacted before, and by basically people running telegraph lines through. And what the telegraph company had done to like keep the peace was they'd leave them like gifts, leave them like steel tools and things like that, and just stay away from them. And if they get killed, then it's just white people getting killed. You don't retaliate, and just keep it like that because they had poison darts was the thing. They were shooting poison darts at people. So I don't know if it was the frog poison or what, but so he kept the same approach to it. You know, he just stayed away from them. If they were attacked, they didn't fight back. They just left, and was able to investigate a large amount of the Amazon. Uh, he discovered some tributaries. One of the rivers was one of the tributaries was named after him. Um, it was the River of Doubt was the one that they were
Right.
exploring. Right. So at some point during this trip, his canoe capsizes, and he gashed his leg pretty badly on something that was under the water. And of course, if you're in the Amazon in that muddy water and you get a big cut on your leg, it gets infected. So he started getting real sick, and it was real bad. And so he told them to just go on without him, leave him behind. Like this, if I have to leave my bones in South America,
Right.
I'll do
And
that.
that's it. He was like, I'd rather die than hold you guys up and kill you. I mean, not just
Right.
hold them up, but, bring
Hmm.
you guys down with me.
Yeah. But his son Kermit was with him, and his son was like, "I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving my dad." And so he eventually realized that, like, if his son wasn't leaving, the party wasn't leaving without him. So if
Right.
he didn't like do his best to like get in the canoe and travel, everybody was going to die.
Right.
So they ended up making it back. Um, the World War One broke out, and he was a big proponent of getting involved. He supported getting involved, and he went to, was it Wilson at the time? Um,
I think it still was Wilson. Yeah.
yeah, so he went to go see Wilson. Was like, dude, let me run an army. Let me go over there and be a general. And Wilson decided now he wasn't going to let him do it. He refused, and I mean that was really that was the thing though with Teddy. He's always trying to be on the front lines of every exciting thing that's going on, you know?
That's That's the thing, like, a lot of the stories I read, they were like, "Oh, it said he fought a mountain lion," and then as I read more, it's like, well, his dogs had it pinned down, so he's like, "You know what? I don't even need my gun. I'm just going in with a knife and I'm gonna get him." And, like, I was like, well, any one of these stories could be like embellishment or, who knows? But then when it's like 25 stories,
Right.
of badassery, you're just like, "Oh, you know what? I bet you to just even find yourself in harm's way. Like, I don't even want to deal with like mosquitoes or snakes or bugs in the Amazon. I'm not going there for a 2-hour tour,
Right.
let alone the expedition, right? You're not
Hmm.
putting yourself in these positions unless you kind of have no fear and, are down for whatever. And to end up, yeah, he is the original adrenaline junkie, right?
Hmm.
That's the theory. And he loves outside, he loves nature, he wants everybody to have it and be able to embrace it. He preserved all this land, which again, I understand. Like, I'm kind of like, the government. I think nobody thought the government would just turn into the big control freaks that they ended up being. And you
Right.
see why it could end badly, but he wanted to protect things and make sure they were there for you. And that's
Right.
kind of what's awesome. He wanted to make sure that there was nature, there was Yellowstone, there was all these beautiful places that people could see that, that people could enjoy it, and also that nobody can go in and kind of corrupt it.
Right.
And I feel like that majesty, a lot of it would have been lost if it
Hmm.
wasn't for him.
Yeah. If you don't think that, go to Niagara Falls and see what that shit looks like now. You
Yeah.
know,
It's
it's
just
nothing but hotels and
E
concrete.
exactly, it's not what you want it to be, and so I get it. There is a lot of awesome, like, there's a lot of things that I think the government shouldn't be in, but man, when you see some of the majesty that he saved for this country,
Hmm.
it's pretty freaking awesome. So,
Yeah. As far as government overreach goes, I feel like the one I am least upset about is national parks.
yeah, that's
Probably
not your big problem,
the best national park system in the entire world.
they just
And
gotta keep people from poking the bears now, and the
um, do what you want. You know what I mean? You get eaten by a bear. That's just natural selection, man.
that's right.
I always see
So,
people out there fucking with buffalo and shit. Like, you're gonna end up dying, But whatever, dude. Do your
yeah.
thing. People are stupid, you
No,
know.
but and that's one of the things, like, people are like, "Oh, well, how does this have to do with survival and prepping?" But I gotta say, having no fear and going into things and being bold and being a leader and seeing things, as they are and embracing life, the whole thing is about living. You wanna enjoy life, man. You gotta get out there and do it. If you just play it safe and go through the motions, then what's the point? You gotta embrace it. And there's nothing wrong with being a badass. So I don't know. You guys have thoughts, ideas, email us at preppingbadass@gmail.com. Also, put it in the comments, especially if you think there's somebody that we need to cover that we might be overlooking, that you think, what, that guy stands out. We could dig into it. That's something we do. But Kevin, any last word on Roosevelt?
That's all I got.
Anyway, with that, I'd say stay safe and we will talk to you guys next week.